Thanks for tuning in to the World XP podcast. If you're enjoying the content, please drop us up, drop a like, and let us know your thoughts below in the comments. Also, please consider supporting our podcast via the link below. It really helps us out. Fred, welcome to the World XP podcast. I appreciate you getting up early to have the conversation. But yeah, how are you?
I'm fine. I'm fine. Thanks so much for having me. Yeah, daylight savings time. I can't believe it's going to be spring.
I know. I woke up and this morning I was like, oh, it's later than I meant to get up. And then I realized obviously it was daylight savings time and I felt a little bit better about myself.
That's great. I have another one of these at 12:30 in the morning, so it's going to be a long day. But hey, starts here. It's great.
There you go. So why don't you give a little bit of an intro of who you are and what you do? And then as those listening know, we'll have the question from the previous guest and then we'll jump right
Sure.
into it.
Okay. Well, my name is Fred Mednick. I founded Teachers Without Borders in 2000 in order to create teacher networks and global change. And I did it in order to connect teachers to information in order to change the scene where the teachers are really the central protagonists in the change-making space. And it's grown to 171 countries. And we focus on education in emergencies, girls' education, peace and human rights. So it's been the love of my life. And I was doing my doctoral dissertation, and I told the chair I wanted to do this, and he said, "Are you out of your effing mind?" And I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, you're just trying to take on the whole world." And so, yeah, it could feel like an extended manic episode or something, but I did it anyway. And I'm a professor. Well, I'm just retired, so professor emeritus at a university in Brussels. And so I've been doing that for the last 6 years, and now and now the book and the courses in Europe have been all about education and social change.
Yeah, makes total sense. 1990. You've been doing this for a while. That's good.
Yeah.
Um, so the question from the previous guest is, what's one profound message that, if adopted by everyone who heard it, would change the world for the better?
This at what, 7 a.m. on a,
Yeah, will make you think.
okay. I would say that um, investing in teachers as major players. So, teachers, it's the largest professionally trained group in the world. They know who's sick or missing or orphaned by AIDS or, at risk for human trafficking. The teachers are the glue that holds our society together. They've got their ear to the ground, and they're change agents in everybody's backyard. And if we'd only listen to them instead of demonize them, then there'd be a very powerful voice. So I would say, you know, um, because I think brains are evenly distributed around the world, and that we need to depend upon those teachers. I think that that is a different focus. Imagine if teachers were on, you know, at Davos, or had a seat at the UN, or were in on boards of trustees. Get that teacher voice to be central. Act Because look, their classrooms are laboratories of democracy. They helped to build this thing. So, well, why are they missing? And so it's it may sound like a platitude or a Hallmark card. For me, it's an activist position.
Yeah, that makes sense, and I don't disagree at all. I think around I want to say around outside DC, there was a music teacher that got invited to the Grammys recently. Um, so I don't know, maybe that's a start to
Yeah, it
something.
is. It is. They have a voice.
Yeah. So I've got the kind of list of points from the book. And before we get into those, I wanted to ask because I don't disagree with anything that you said, but I think people can say, at least in the US, anyways, because that's where my experience being in school is, that
Yeah,
they've had both good teachers and not so good teachers. Both my mother-in-law and father-in-law were teachers, educators, principals, right?
yeah,
Had family co as coaches, all involved in the school system. My mom is a substitute, long-term substitute teacher, so like I I get the difficulties of being a teacher. With that said, you have good teachers and then not so good ones. And I wanted to pick your brain on this topic because um on maybe the training or the education that goes into it, or maybe the right, because a really good teacher can really change somebody's life for the better, but at the same token a really
yeah.
not so good teacher can really ruin a subject or something for a kid. So I wanted to hear your thoughts on that because um not that your book is all roses and sunshine about teachers, but there's it's very nuanced, and obviously people are very nuanced beings, I guess, for lack of a better word. So I wanted to hear your thoughts on kind of the training and the education of the teachers for how to become better teachers, and just how maybe I don't know if I don't I just want to hear your thoughts on those on my
Oh,
thoughts, I
sure.
guess.
I mean, when you open yourself up to promoting the largest professionally trained group in the world, you're going to see many, many examples of awful teachers, or warehoused teachers, which are just teachers that have been are not good, but they're just put in an office because they can't be fired. And I think I start the book off in the small places by talking about being demonized by a teacher. Um, and so I talk all about um, how the most traumatic moments I've had were because of, a teacher, and then how another teacher turned it around. So I am realistic um, about it. I'm not naive about the challenges that we have. Um, but I'd say in the overwhelming number of cases, um, part of teaching is your training, as you said, and and in many training programs, they may be, spotty or irrelevant training, um, completely outside of the realm of what teachers have to do, every single day. I do like Teach for America, where I think they're far more realistic about what people experience in classrooms. Would like to see more of that in mainstream um, professional training. Uh, but I'd also like to see their voice heard in professional development. And if teachers
Hmm.
were the central protagonists there in their own development, um, then we wouldn't have to deal with the sort of BS stuff that comes down the line. There is an unbelievable over dependence or over focus on testing every little thing. And teachers have little time to teach. I have seen teachers teach huge classes very effectively. And I've seen teachers, have small, perfect size classes and do a terrible job. But I think that there is this testing pressure that comes down the line, so that they subvert everything, just to get through the test. So I think there's a lot of barriers in teachers' ways, and I think that the goodwill of teachers sometimes gets trounced, and then there's some real whack jobs to get into the profession. You know, I can't I can't deny that. I was a high school principal in two big schools. I knew all about that. So I'm hopeful, but I'm not naive.
Yeah, fair enough. I think there's whack jobs in every profession if we're being totally honest with ourselves.
Yeah.
The standardized testing thing is also interesting for me because I completely agree with what you said there as well. I think a lot of focus is on let's make sure that they pass the test or get a good score on whatever standardized thing is, so we can have good numbers for the state and we have funding can come in for the school, etc. And I've gone through that thought experiment before, and then and then the next step for me that I don't have an answer to, or even really a hypothesis is, okay, well, if we don't have standardized tests, like let's just in a world, let's say we don't have them at all, then where is it up to, I guess it would be up to the teachers or the individual schools in which case what they're teaching, which I don't necessarily think is a bad thing, but I often wonder about the preparation of students for life rather than to pass the test. I was also wondering your
Yeah,
thoughts on
sure.
that, and I think that these are kind of going with the second and third ones a little bit, but I don't know. They're all interrelated
Yeah,
with the points there. But yeah, anyways, what do you think?
sure. So, look, the testing craze is wrong because the, they're taught at the end of their studies rather than while they're going through. So no one who wants to tamp down, what we call summative assessment is says that we shouldn't, assess kids. It's just how you do it. And there, as I used to teach writing, you don't wait until the paper is done and then you turn it in and you get this grade and the kid doesn't know what the issues are because you can't possibly give that kind of feedback. But if you organize your classroom around writing smaller things and learning how kids approach this, formative assessment or assessing, as you go. But now we've just done this, sweeping um, test everything. I mean, I've seen situations in which there's a drone in the classroom looking at, you know, um, things going on. There are actually blood pressure tests to see, they're trying all sorts of things, and kids are specimens instead of, human beings. So just at least on the testing thing, you want kids to know how to read and you want to be able to assess it. And there's a million better ways to do it. But this is a system, and uh, you could do it far more efficiently with a kind of formative assessment, the kind of learning by walking around, and rather than these kinds of bubble tests and things like that, right? The big change in the SAT is that it goes online
Yeah.
recently. I think that there are many, many ways of learning how kids learn.
Yeah. Part of the genesis of these questions is school was not, I did well in school, but it wasn't my friend, I guess. I've said that a lot of times b before. Um, I love learning. That's one of the reasons why I do this podcast and why I've still been doing the podcast 100 and whatever episodes and 3, 4
Yeah,
years later, because it's a bit of an education for me. But this is a way that at least the current version of me learns, and the how the schools, at least where I went, set up were not depending on the class and of course. But so I guess that's where like I heard recently, maybe a couple years ago, too. And this goes back to to the writing example. I hated essays, but then I heard somebody say that writing an essay is just writing a long answer to a question. So when you have the freedom to pick the question that you want, like actually pick a question that you want to know the answer to, instead of just whatever the teacher is asking, and it makes it a lot easier to write. And I was like, oh, that would have been helpful. And so, um, so uh, how? I don't know. I'm just kind of like musing and throwing stuff out there at the moment. But so, how did you teach writing? Because you can imagine going through, and people listening can imagine the gazillions of different authors that exist. There's so many different writing styles and ways to approach how to write and all these different things. So for you as an educator, you've got a bunch of kids that want to do it this way and a bunch of kids that want to do it that way. How do you approach that in a way that's helpful for everyone? And the other kind of caveat, or the other reason for this question, is because I'm a soccer coach, and so there's some kids that pick up skills really easily and other ones that don't, and you have to kind of balance out how much time you spend on the skill so the one kid's not bored, but the other kid gets the attention that he needs. Like, how do you, especially for something like writing, I would imagine it's more subjective than math. So how do you go
yeah.
about balancing that and teaching that?
Well, there's different ways to teach writing and teaching math and teaching soccer. So, certainly we can go through each. But in terms of the writing thing, my look, I was raised by a very strict grammarian. So, it was pound, and that's, I guess I learned it, the hard way, but I taught it an easy way. And many of us say, writers have a voice. And I think that what you should do in teaching writing is to actually have the actual voice speak. You have conversations with kids about what they say. They may be so super intimidated about the act of writing and worrying about those grammatical conventions and all that. But talking to them is interesting and following the logic there. Um, teaching and 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 then reading it aloud to oneself and reading it aloud to others and having other kids say what it is that their peer just said to them. Is that clear? And how could we do this better? I mean, it's a conversation, just as you may be in a room with a book, but you're in a room with a person who has written a book, just their ghost. And if you could have that conversation with them, the coherence and the clarity and the memory is all there. Math is a representation of the physical world. I don't know why people aren't being physical when they teach math. You know, soccer. I mean, it's really about movement and places, and it may be, about uh, having kids, visualize angles and practice this one thing. We tend to tell kids, you know, how to, um, how to do everything at the same time. And so I think that great teachers are actually coaches and artists. The artist is the portfolio of their work, not the thing that they have to turn in. And the coach is for the small thing, the thing that a person observed. And I just think really good teaching is looking at the kid, looking at the context, and looking at, that child's voice. And I think you could bring that out, in an individual kid, even in a huge class. There are ways.
Yeah, the coach and the artist analogy, I really like that actually. Um, okay, so let's switch to kind of Teachers Without Borders and the book. So back in the 90s, you found teachers. What was the thought
Well, 20,
process?
2000. Yeah, 2000.
2000. Well,
Yeah,
you had
right.
the thought pro you were thinking about it
Yeah,
before, right?
right,
So
right.
where like what's going on in the world that in your head you see a need for this thing? What was the void in the world that you saw?
Yeah,
And then
yeah.
how did you kind of begin to form the pieces to pull the pieces together to actually make it happen? And then we can kind of go from there in a little bit. But how did the formation of that happen?
Oh, sure. Really quick. I was running a school here in Seattle, and it was a school for, I mean, we'll call this a school for advantaged kids. Um, and it was a wonderful school, and I loved working there. But, I was feeling a little claustrophobic. The internet is coming in. This was one of the first schools in the country that had an EDU address. So we were very advanced in computers. And, it's the millennium is switching over. Um, I had always been, I lived in a kind of international family. My father was an international folk dance teacher. Um, and then, I had written another book about adolescence. It was called Rebel Without a Car. Um, and and so I wanted to find out what teenagers were like for what we need to do for the 21st century. So with the internet, I started asking these random questions on the internet, and one of them was, what do you see outside your window? I thought, how cool is that, And my doctoral committee said, what kind of frickin' question is that? What do you see outside your window? That's not a research question about the needs of the 21st century. And I said, okay, yeah, I understand, I'll change it. But I kept on getting these responses.
Can I
And
interject really quick?
sure,
That's interesting to me that they said that because if we're talking about education and how kids learn, rather than I'm sure there was a conversation about like why you asked that and stuff, but it's interesting to me that and I'm sure this is not just specifically to you, but
yeah,
that instead of seeking to understand, right? Because you have this idea that's kind of forming in your head when you ask this question, and it can be turned into a very good research topic, maybe not in the exact vein that they want, but isn't that the point of learning?
yeah,
So I
sure,
so I
yeah.
don't I don't know. Anyways,
Well, it's funny, Eric. It was chatty. Let's put it that way.
yeah.
How you doing? What's outside your window?
Yeah, yeah.
And so I asked this question with no real thought about, the what. I mean, you can't really collect data, right? But man, oh man, the responses I got, about bars on windows or no windows or windows with, even bullet holes, windows that are cracked, windows that look out on this, a tenement wall. I got answers from people who weren't teachers, like a truck driver, in Texas, going across the state, wrote something about, I feel like I'm driving on a perforated line, splitting my life. I mean, it's just so interesting. And um, I got answers from prisoners, uh, you know, and then I started, to ask, well, what would you like to see outside your window? I mean, right? And but one of the things that happened, and it was on a single day, is I got an email from a woman from Norway who said it was snowing so hard. It was like white and gray and slush and white and gray and slush. And she says, I would do anything to see some sun. I want to do a sun angel somewhere in the sand. I am just blown out by this. Within an hour, there was a woman in Nicaragua who was describing the heat outside her window and that, undulating, weird, um, you know, optical illusion of heat. And it was so hot, and there were bars in her window, and she's never seen the sun. So that day, I connected the two women together who started to talk about things and share ideas and invite each other to their home. And I thought, holy, whatever, can't say, or maybe I don't know. What if I connected teachers, as a network? And there were no teacher networks really around that time. Teachers as activists, teachers who want to make change in their communities. I mean, after all, those brains are evenly distributed. That was a light bulb. I was doing it. I finished the dissertation. I was doing something else. But then a few weeks after I finished, I just quit. I fired myself, from this fancy job running a private school for really engaged and wonderful kids. But, I'm also smelling the smoke of the Battle of Seattle in 1999. you know and that movement was against the downside of globalism. There were digital haves and digital have-nots. So my whole prior activist life, the doctorate, finishing my doctorate, or what I call my union card, um, then having the Battle of Seattle around in my, smell it, and then these wonderful international, conversations. And I said, screw it. I'm gonna connect teachers, and we're gonna go for this.
That is, it's interesting. I've had a lot of maybe entrepreneurial types on the podcast before, and almost all of them start off with some like, oh, I just noticed a thing, and then I turned it into whatever it ended up being. Um, that's really cool. So, okay, so now you've got this idea and you started the organization. How does it grow until you are in and when do you end up in Brussels because of this, or is that just another
Oh,
opportunity that comes along later?
that would be a geography lesson, Eric, involving the Minister of Education um, in Panama, Suriname. I mean, it's a long story. But how I ended up at the university had to do with a project in Haiti that got the attention of someone who leads big projects for the Organization of American States in the small Dutch country of Suriname. Um, that has, they speak Dutch and they have a relationship, with Belgium. I was there. I was teaching at Johns Hopkins, and so I brought the dean there. And one thing led to another. I just sort of fell in love with the dean, who I just thought this guy was fantastic in Brussels. We hit it off, and he invited me to teach there. I would travel to Brussels 6 times a year until the pandemic, of course. Um, and in fact, the university closed down as I was talking. All my students got bing, 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 on their phones. Um, and I loved that university, and I was able to take that, have interns work for Teachers Without Borders. Um, and it was a glorious experience. I mean, I pretty feel much, between running really good schools, Teachers Without Borders, and this professorship, I feel like it's been a pretty charmed career. I've seen the worst stuff that anyone can see in the world, you know, um, dying babies, refugee camps, been in Afghanistan and Pakistan, several, times. I've seen really the worst of humanity. And then for some reason, I keep on feeling hopeful. Because look, the teachers that work with us are folks that are not, grandstanders. That's why I call the book In the Small Places, stories of teacher change makers and the power of human agency. Because I think teachers aren't born or made, they show up you know and I love the idea that people show up to take. So all the stuff at Teachers Without Borders is generated by teachers in developing countries and led by them, and that gives me hope.
Can you expand on that? Is developed and led by them in what way? Does Teachers Without Borders give them mechanisms, or how does that work?
Yeah, well, it's like what you see outside your window, because what ended let me sort of finish that story before going to this one.
Yeah.
When I did my doctorate, I eventually crafted a question about, what you'd like to see and teach kids for the 21st century. But what happened is one of the first internet research doctorates around. Um, but what happened is that question that originally, posed got all these responses, and I would always respond to the responses. And we would have conversations, as I said about writing earlier with them. But I had to ask 3 iterations of questions. So ask a question, get the response, ask a question about their response, that's just the nature of the study, to try to get to some kind of consensus about what education should be like. But I got something like a 75% return rate every single time I asked a question. It meant that about 75% of the people kept with it. Now, you do this radio thing and your soccer and you do all this other stuff. Stuff falls off a cliff generally when you start things. You can be guaranteed that. But I think building the relationship with teachers by being a personal presence in their lives, asking them questions and depending upon them led to unbelievable projects where they said, "Hey, Fred, I got this idea. and I want to do something about this. And, down the line, it usually fell into the camp of girls' education, peace and human rights, or education in emergencies, And so you'd get people with like minds together, those brains evenly distributed. And man, oh man, they just took the ball and ran with it. I was a traffic cop, a connector, a route guy. And so we just connected people personally. You could do so much on this, kinds of social networks. But the fire of somebody individually being attended to and listened to is 1,000 times better than, just making this mechanical connection between a couple of people. Worrying together, eating together, asking questions, being humble, not being arrogant about, we have all the answers. So we don't descend upon places. People get in touch with us. I have this idea. We nurture it. They get connected locally. We're not drive-by international development do-gooders. It's
That's
all
probably
local
that's
stuff.
probably a good thing.
Yeah.
Um, okay, I want to, so you mentioned the teachers aren't born or made, they show up. And I very much agree with that. And that's kind of tied into the one of the very first questions I I asked with you have good teachers and not so good teachers. But you have good teachers that really show up and really make a difference. And in the explanation piece, and you mentioned this as well earlier, um, that like they've got really their ear to the ground of the kids and what's going on. And some of the kids are maybe not doing so well at home, or they've got other things going on. Um, and then I think that ties into the fourth one that you have, that people argue that teachers have too much on their plates. Um, and that their world should be limited to the classroom. So I think those are tied together in a way that is inherently just about the people that show up, the really driven teachers that show up, they make it their job to understand like what is going on with the kids in a way that um can be very beneficial to them. And so for somebody to say that they have too much on their plate, I think they voluntarily take a lot of that responsibility on as they show up, to your point. Is that within the book, kind of how do you touch on that and how do you talk to that? Is it tied together in the book as well?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, let's break that down. This notion that, well, Fred, you said there's too much testing and this and that, there's just too much on their plate. And I can agree with that. But that's not how teachers work. They work on, reciprocity and sharing and giving. That's why they went into the profession in the first place. And for people to say, well, the world's in their classroom, I say, oh my God, public health, isn't that not a global thing? Your world is just those guys. You know, um, Climate change, not global. What you're studying these days, not global. Fake news, not global. So everything, it's almost as if global education is a redundancy. All education has to be global. And what I've found is that teachers with a global sensibility are much more inclined to pay attention to their local kids. The faces they see in front of them are the faces of the world. And in some cases here on the West Coast, kids in classrooms, have that fear on their face that they may be deported. They may be dreamers, but they could be deported somewhere to a country they are theoretically from, but have never seen. And so, I think it really patronizes teachers to say, hey, look, your job is to just go in there in front of those. If you'd only spend time with those 25, 30 kids, stop doing all this other stuff, you would be great. But you can't stop doing that. The world is in your classroom, right? And so I have a passage in the book where I say, you know, it really it really patronizes teachers to do this, to say that it's just focus on the, it's like saying just dribble and shut up. And so there's a phrase where I say, look, it's not that they're tyrannized by the urgent, which, we often are, the details of life. Yeah, sure. These teachers, the ones that show up you know, are concerned about the urgency of tyranny. So they're building democracy on a global scale. They're thinking about these other issues. And when you do that, you have the whole kid in mind. So a teacher in a classroom is just a microcosm of the world, and you slice and dice that, and you'll see the whole world in the classroom. And that's when I get way high on the soapbox, you know, because it says, just fix my plumbing, just deliver my mail, just do this.
Yeah. What would you say to those? I can hear some teachers saying, well, I can't teach the kids. I've got so much administrative this going on and administrative that going on. There's too much on my plate. I can't even teach the kids anymore. What would your response be to that sort of sentiment?
Yeah, yeah, it's a fair and a stunningly unfair question, Eric. Um, it's a totally fair question, at the same time. I um I don't want to have a glib answer, look,
Sure.
I'm a professor, I get to stand a little bit above it, but it's not as if I haven't had, those experiences. Um, well, I'm going to have answers that they're going to just roll their eyes. Become the administrator. Um, B, depend upon your network. You are not this isolation of, being in a class where I remember I watched my daughter teach. It was a fantastic experience, but she sent a note to me, take over, Dad, I gotta pee. Um, you know, you you don't have time. You've got all this administrative stuff. You've got all the kids in front of you. But uh, I have seen a lot of teachers organize. Um, I've seen a lot of teachers depend upon their peers and paraprofessionals and parents, and not to be afraid of parents. I'm glad. I, I'm glad I'm not in some states that to say you can't teach this or you can't do that. But teachers are also resourceful people, and there are a lot of workarounds. There are a lot of tools now. Um, Someday AI is going to not be so, much of a hallucination. It's going to, really work. But there's also, strategies that teachers can employ that can save them a whole hell of a lot of time in their teaching. So sometimes I feel for teachers to do that. I am very much a way of figuring out how to get rid of all that administrative stuff by finding efficient ways to do that. Um, but I have to say, part of it is making sure your leaders are great. The best teacher I ever worked with, the one that I think is one of the finest teachers I ever supervised, was an art teacher who, I guess I can't swear on these things, but who,
You could.
okay, well, she just didn't have her shit together as far as the administrative stuff. Okay. And she was just the most fantastic teacher. I'm finding myself covering for her all the time. She's chatting up the kids about this and that, But wherever she was with these kids, and she went off to other schools, very poor schools, she was an art teacher, they'd get into RISD. They would, you know, you think, how does she do this? But she had a way. First of all, I think I was a very supportive principal. So we would figure out ways for her to get some of her stuff together. And I guess my point is that lots of teachers are ground into these machines of paperwork by the state and also by clueless principals. Now, look, I don't want principals to get on my case here, but your job is to be an instructional leader. And, you're the one standing behind the elephant with a shovel so that the teachers, can, you're there to remove obstacles so that teachers can do their jobs.
Hmm. That's a very good way of putting it. I want to, maybe it's not necessarily a follow-up, but at least near where I live, I know a lot of teachers are quitting, or it's difficult to find capable individuals like the ones that you're mentioning to go into the profession due to some of the
Yeah.
reasons that we just talked about. Um, what are your thoughts on that? I had a friend of mine got his master's in education for elementary education, and he taught for like a year, and then he was like, I can't.
Got
The
blown out, right?
yeah, just burnt out. He's like, I have to do this, do this, do this, do that, and one part of me was like, didn't you know what you were getting into? But I think that anecdote is kind of representative of a larger maybe portion of teachers, especially kind of the younger ones that maybe thought that they wanted to get into it to help. They were like, we want to help kids and we want to do all the things that you've mentioned before. Um, I'm speaking as a teacher, I'm not able to do this in this way. I'm going to try to do something else. Like the job that I work at, we've got several former teachers that have joined our company in the last year or so. They're like, I can't teach anymore. I'm going to career switch, etc. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a really difficult question because um, look, when I was a teacher, I wanted to be a teacher. And it was it as I started out, a kind of a terrible experience. And I'm obsessive anyway, and I want to get it, right. But I had a mentor, and I felt like I had a duty to the kids and a duty to this mentor. So she said, "Look, Fred, you don't know how to do a lesson plan. You don't really know how to teach. You don't kind of." And she said, "I don't even understand why but your kids are achieving. So I think you have talent, but you have no skills." um, so every Thursday night, she had me come over to her house and do my lessons all over again. She had a chalkboard in her living room, but she took care of me. And if you are struggling look, there's two things that are on teachers' minds as they begin this profession. Two things. The research is unequivocally clear. One is classroom management. Um, Holy Moses, this is crazy. They won't shut up, or, all this stuff. And classroom management is everything. And the second most concerning thing is, will I ever go out on a date? Just the truth. That's what the research says. Classroom management and having a life. And so one of the things that mentors do as they, get teachers into this, they should focus on the management stuff and some of the life stuff. That's what I mean by clearing away those obstacles to let them do their job. Because your friend had immediate needs that weren't being addressed.
Hmm.
Um, and just one last story. So I have a friend, it's kind of the opposite case. I have a friend who took his traditional life and became a lawyer, was not happy with this life, and he gets a PhD in oceanography. Okay. Okay. And he said, I want to run a college. Gets a job running a college. He just pursues it. So, lawyer, oceanographer, running a college. You know what he's doing now? And what he's convinced he'll stay at? He joined Teach for America. He's 50 something. He's the oldest guy by far. But, he's learned a lot over his time. He loved the people that he was, interviewing for. he's got these 20-something colleagues, and they, see him as that old sincere guy. And he had a terrible time, both with classroom management and seeing somebody because he was divorced. And over time, he realized that his obligation to the kids and his colleagues and the level of support that he got says, and I said, I don't know, his name is Joel. I said, is there a book in here about your little stint with TFA? All right? You're an author, you have your PhD, you're a lawyer. You're like, he goes, I swear to God, this is it. I'm not writing anything. I'm not taking secret notes. I'm thinking about the kids. I feel right about this. But he attributes it to the support that he gets. And, you know, sure, people can go into this and say, oh my God, I have no ability to do anything here. Is this all there is? I get that. But, you know, teachers are most isolated when the door closed, but they're profoundly social people, and you have to bridge that gap.
That's a very good point. Um, so obviously we've touched on the book here and there throughout the conversation so far, but let's just go right into the book. What
Good. That
made you?
publicist will be a happy puppy. That's great.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I guess I maybe I should have told you this beforehand, but one of the reasons why I do it this way is I think that people, at least in my experience, people who want to hear more of what the author has to say then are more inclined to go get the book, other than if we just tell them what the book says up front.
Yeah.
I don't know. So that's just kind of how I do it. And then obviously we'll talk about the book at some length. But
Yeah.
um, so what made you want to write this book?
Well, uh, I never thought I would be writing a book about Teachers Without Borders because I never thought Teachers Without Borders would last. um, so I, um, so Eleanor Roosevelt, about 10 years into the UN Declaration of Human Rights, she goes, where does change come from? Really, in the end, it comes from the small places, outside of, the maps and the, historical proclamations and all the well-dressed people in Paris, making, great statements in the small places. And if it doesn't happen there, it's not going to happen anywhere. And then I thought about all the people I had met. The first guy I worked with in the project was named Jihad. Um, and, you think, oh, Americans need to stay away from that dude. Sweetest guy in the world, a wonderful, he's a Palestinian guy. I'm Jewish, we're very close. And so I started out, by doing a project in his area, in the, a Bedouin community, which is just fantastic. Then you have, these people, another project was a guy named Raphael who was just a math teacher who got in touch, but he was running conferences and doing stuff in disabled and, working with women entrepreneurs, brains evenly distributed, right? And I just said, look, if I'm going to be a good principal, in a school, and I'm standing there with a shovel behind the elephant, I have to remove obstacles and let people do their jobs. And I apply that to a global network of teachers, identify the great ones, and help to remove obstacles so that they can do their jobs. And so there's a story about Raphael and all his work. He ended up creating a Voice of Teachers radio show, listened to 1.7 million listeners in, Nigeria. Samina Nazir, Samina is doing this amazing work in, for women and handicrafts in Pakistan. Solmaz, this woman who's doing earthquake science and safety. They're just like, I guess when you ask people what's outside their window, and you have a conversation with them, and you learn that, they can do it, and you're there to support them, you end up having friends from around the world doing these great things. And so now I wrote the book about them to honor them and to honor those small places. Um, and I'm going to start my own little podcast, which I have questions about, because your thing that you're doing here looks easy. It's not easy. So, nice job, Eric. Um, but I want just to hear their stories and, just actually listen to them, write about these people I love, and show how, teachers really are those change agents. And for people struggling in the profession, or just feel burnt out, I think this will remind them why they got into this thing in the first place.
Yeah. Are you, so as you talk about all those different teachers, is there, uh, obviously you mentioned you retired, and I assume you're still running Teachers Without Borders, but is there going to be is this going to be like a part two type thing as well, where you're going to keep collecting stories, or is that going to be maybe part of the some other form? It seems like a really good way to kind of continue to recognize the teachers that are a part of the organization.
Yeah, I have a site called inthesmallplaces.com, and there we're opening up a space for people to send in stories, their own or of other people who are doing things, and we'll connect it to a map um, of, in the small places on the global scale, where people can, read the stories, of teachers around the world who are doing this great work, and then connect them. So it's in the small places is kind of a way of focusing on the outside their window and what they'd like to see outside their window and the change they're making to make sure that the view outside their window, is what they would imagine.
Yeah, 100%. Where can the people find the book, and obviously you just mentioned the website, but where
Yeah.
can, if the people are curious about more information, or to get the book, where should they go?
Sure. Well, inthesmallplaces.com is one place where they can go, or wherever they order books, Amazon, Barnes and Noble. Yes, Barnes and Noble exists, that are not, Google Books, whatever. And it's Collective Inc. is the publisher. But inthesmallplaces.com is probably a good place to start. And the publisher Collective Inc. is part of a whole Change Maker series, so people could look that up. And order it wherever they order their books. One thing is that every penny of the proceeds, author proceeds, I'm donating. So I want people to buy this book, buy it, buy it, buy it, but I ain't getting a dime. So lest one think that this is all self-promotion. All the money will go to two things: the Jane Goodall Institute and to global literacy programs. The Jane Goodall Institute, because Jane befriended me. She's turning 90 next month, and my book comes out on April 1st. And I want to, and I want to honor her birthday. So all the blood, sweat, and tears goes into, a gift back to her for what she's done for me. Um, so that's why I want, people to drop the 14, $15 and get it.
Yeah. Yeah, go find the book, people. Do you have
Yeah.
any last nickels for those listening? Any parting words? Well, that makes it sound less fun. Any
Well, yeah, parting words means that, I'm
yeah.
gonna die. But I would say, look, I don't want to turn this teacher thing into some tacky Hallmark card. Teachers are great and we love teachers. But I do say that it's a social mission, and you need friends. And so the teachers look, you suffer as a teacher, but when you're having drinks with your friend teachers, the laughter is harder and better. Um, and you suffer, 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 and have a good time. You deserve your breaks. Um, and so I just don't want, what did Emerson say or Thoreau, something like, I don't want to live a life of quiet desperation. Like, what have I done? Better to go through this, suffer, make friends, and realize that there's a part of you that gets touched and you can touch others and you can see it and feel it. You can just right in front of you. So to have hope, if you bail, you bail. It's not the end of the world. Um, but um, if the administration is out of control, become the administration.
Fair enough. I do have one last question for you that you can answer
Sure.
with yes or no. When you're a teacher, is it true that naming your kids is harder because you've had some not so great kids that ruin the names?
Absolutely, absolutely. We are, there's nothing like, we're clear-minded, logical people with huge suspicions and superstitions. Yeah,
Oh,
100%.
all right, guys. We'll see you guys next time. Thanks for listening, and
Thank you.
see you next time.
Yeah,
Peace.
thanks a lot. You too. Thanks again, Eric.